Okay, folks. Reminder again that if you can get your DCFs, it's optional, but if you want to get feedback on your DCFs, try to get them in by Friday. About 40 of you have already done it, so you should have had if you sent in your valuation prior to 10 a.m. this morning, and about 40 of you had, you should have it back already. So if it came after 10 a.m., I haven't had a chance during the break to do it, but I'll try to get it in before this evening back to you. If you wait till Friday, then it will happen a little more sequentially because I'll have a whole stack to go through. So whatever, this I'll do in chronological order to try to be as fair. But please remember the subject head. A few of you already forgotten. Right now it's not a big deal because I can catch it as I go along because it's just, but on Friday evening the blank is going to hit the fan and I will have no idea if you don't put the subject head where your valuation even went. I won't be even able to find it. So please follow it to the T. My perfect DCF. Don't mess with it. So one thing I'm looking for as I look at your DCFs is what story you're telling about a company, even if you don't claim to be telling one. So today I'm going to start off by presenting you with the numbers on evaluation, and I want you to guess the story. This is actually an interesting way to connect stories to numbers. Is you look at a DCF, what's the story here? Ready? So here are the numbers I show you. And as I give these numbers, I'm going to ask you to think about the story that must be behind my numbers. I show you a company where I expect revenues to grow at 50% a year for the next 10 years. Right? So that's what you see as a growth, right? I show you an operating margin of 20% in year 10, and it's twice the industry average. I show very little reinvestment over the next 10 years. And I give you a cost of capital of 7%, which is significantly lower than the cost of capital of an average company. So that's my Excel spreadsheet. Now, I want you to take those numbers and reverse engineer from those numbers what kind of implicit story I must be telling you about the company. So ready? What am I telling you about this company? Is it a small company in a growing market or a large company in a mature market? What must my story be? And what is the clue that gives it away? A 50% compounded annual growth rate in revenues, if you think about it, basically means at 50% over 10 years, you're probably taking your revenue, increasing it tenfold. Can it happen? Yes, if you're a small company in a large or growing market. And if this is Volkswagen, right now, what should you say? Impossible story, turn it back to me. So there's no point even looking at the rest, saying, but I did a beta, and I don't care. Because once your revenue growth rate has gone off the tracks, the rest is going to go off the tracks as well. So it must be a small company in a growing market. Am I telling you anything about competitive advantages, barriers to entry? I'm not directly telling you that, but what am I telling you about the margin? Twice that of the industry, which must mean that you have a niche business, but it can't be a niche business if it's 40%, 50% a year, or that you have some competitive advantage that's going to allow you to charge more. Am I telling you something about the capital intensity of the business model? The fact that I have very low reinvestment would mean I have some kind of business model that is capital intensive. Again, if I did this with Volkswagen, you're going to push back and say, how the heck are you going to turn cars out from an app? That'd be interesting if you could. Maybe three-dimensional printers, I have no idea. But it must be a low capital intensity model. And what am I telling you anything about the product, whether it's discretionary or non-discretionary? I'm giving you a really low cost of capital. You can dance around this and talk about betas and cost of debt, but the reality is if you have a really low cost of capital, it must be because you're in a business that is non-discretionary. You see that when you want to look at somebody else's DCF, if I'm doing the DCF, you know what I want you to do? I want you to get lost in the forest by asking me questions like, can you use a 48% revenue growth rate instead of a 50%? Is your 20% margin, should it be 19%? Your return capital, how did you compute it? Because these are the numbers where I pull you into my turf and I win every single time. If you want to really look at valuations and ask the right questions, what you have to do is extract the implicit story and then put me on the spot. Is it a small company in a growing market? If not, the revenue growth doesn't work. What are the competitive advantages? And if I hem and haw and say, we were the first ones there, it's the weakest possible competitive advantage you can think. I couldn't think of any others. We were there first. Then you will say, maybe the 20% margin doesn't hold up. So when you send in your Excel spreadsheet, I'm hoping you flesh out the details, but if you don't be surprised if the email asks you, why are you acting like Volkswagen is a small company in a huge market? So I didn't assume that, but a 50% growth rate effectively does. You don't even have to put it in words. Your Excel spreadsheet tells me a story, and if you don't like that story, I'm not the problem. You have a problem with yourself. So you've got to work through the story that you're comfortable. And that's why it's so good to flesh out your own story as you're putting in the numbers. Now, could your story change? You're going to turn in a story and evaluation this Friday, right? Could it change next week? Of course. You could have been doing Boeing 3 weeks ago and look at how quickly that story changed. Story changed. In fact, one of the companies I've said I've valued repeatedly over time is Apple, right? And yesterday, if you saw, there was big Apple announcement. And there's a whole host of Apple stuff coming at you, including an Apple Card where they partnered with Goldman. And my question as I read that was, does this change my story? My story for Apple has been, greatest cash machine in history, but it's a mature, low-growth company. And as I'm looking at that list, it's easy again to get caught up in that list and take some item and go. But the real question is, does it change my big story? I'm not sure yet. Because I want to take a closer look at because potentially the payment business is a huge business, right? MasterCard and Visa dominate it. But it's also a very low margin business. If in fact Apple is able to grow by entering the business, the margins I'm giving them, which are 30% margins in the smartphone business, will get low. Will it net out as a positive? Maybe, maybe not. But there are layers here to each of those announcements that will require unpacking each of them. So if you look at each of those things, any of those things could change. An earnings report, don't get focused on that per share number that analysts say, oh, that's a surprise. Look at the rest of the earnings report. What are you learning about the company that might change your story about the company? Could macroeconomic changes change your story? Well, if you have a company that's very heavily dependent on fuel costs, and there's some macroeconomic story you tell about oil prices rising, and you have an airline as your company, your story could change. So it doesn't even have to be company specific. How about regulatory changes? You're valuing a telecom company, there's a regulatory change. Your story could become much better or much worse. In other words, lots of things will happen after you turn it in on Friday, which is a little bit of bad news, right? Why? You think you're done, but you're not. You're never going to be done. Because on May 13th, you might turn it into me, but if you think of this as an investment, guess what? And you buy the stock, this is an ongoing experiment that will continue. You're never quite done. It's not, I bought the stock, I'm done, because this is a process that will continue to revisit the story. But here's the good news. Once you got your base story and your base numbers, as long as you do maintenance on it. You know what I mean by maintenance? Every 3 months when the earnings report comes out, it's not a big deal. Just go in and revisit the story. Do incremental changes, because if you wait 5 or 10 years, the story can be very different. And finally, I'm a great believer in corporate life cycles, that companies go through this process of aging. I said stories and numbers matter. Stories connect onto numbers. There's a bridge between stories and numbers. But the balance of what drives your valuation might change over the life cycle. So here's my question for you. That mix of story and numbers, do you think that's going to change as companies age? Remember the Uber valuation? How much of my valuation was story and how much of it was number driven? It was almost all story. Why there were no numbers on the ground? If you're valuing a young company, if you're valuing Pinterest, it's mostly story that you then fill in with numbers because there's no financials, no history. If I have to value Levi Strauss, another IPO though, numbers are going to be a much critical part. So your story actually will get more and more constrained. Remember that range of valuations that you get for a company will get narrower as a company ages. So when you think about story and numbers, it opens doors to an entirely more dynamic process. You're no longer working with Excel spreadsheets you plug numbers into. You are telling a story and that story is changing. I think it makes valuation a lot more fun and interesting to think of it as a story converted to numbers because it means you control more of the process. But you got to work realistically. You got to work with those real world constraints you're given. So let's return to where we were the last session, where we were talking about is it possible, is it plausible, is it probable, right? And I gave you examples of impossible stories. Implausible stories, I said, can happen, but you better have a really good reason. And improbable really is a mismatch, which is the other thing I'm going to look for. Is your story at war with itself? So I decided to take my Uber story and pass it through the test. Is it possible, plausible, and probable? What was the Uber story I was telling in June of 2014? Urban car service company, right? Now this is going to be a really easy story to defend. Why? They were already an urban, I wasn't telling you some bigger story. If I told you a story of Uber as a transportation company, my challenge would have been much greater. But here, because I was making the argument that it was going to be an urban car service company, it's clearly possible. Clearly plausible and probable because they're already doing it. The more I tell you a story of something a company will do that it doesn't do right now, the more the onus shifts on me to explain to you why the company can pull it off. So start by understanding the company, tell a story. Before we talk about converting the story into numbers, a couple of cautionary notes. Sometimes, as an investor, or even as a founder, you will hear a story that sounds so good, you want it to be true. I call these runaway stories. I'll give you an example. How many of you graduate in May? Or hope to graduate in May? I do control that process a little bit. No, don't worry, I'm not sadistic. I'm not going to make you stay back. Eh? I'm thinking about it now. Eh? But if you when you graduate in May, I'm sure you're going to go talk to somebody on the elevator right now who said they're going to Evercore. I'm sorry, I said all those mean things. Yeah. But I haven't said the mean things yet, or I will say the mean things. But if you think about where you're going to go and you decide you really don't want to go there. So I'll give you an alternate route. You decide to turn down. You call Goldman Sachs or Evercore and say, remember that job offer you made me? You can keep it. And you decide to become movie producers. Sounds like a lot more fun. You fly out to LA. You set up base at the Beverly Hills Hilton. I'm going to come to you with a movie idea. And you tell me whether this sounds like a movie you'd like to make. It's about a 19-year-old who drops out of Stanford. Who does that? What was their acceptance rate? Like -3% last year? Most selective school in the world. You get in and you drop out. Drops out and starts a business. You're saying another geek starting a tech company? No, this is a 19-year-old woman. That already makes it uncommon, right? Because Bill Gates did drop out of Microsoft and Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard. This is a 19-year-old woman who drops out of Stanford. She starts a business, but not a tech business. It's a blood testing business. Now, how many of you have had experience with the blood testing business status quo in the US? It's a horrifically run business because here's how it works. You got to call a lab to make an appointment for a blood test. They say, we have an opening 6:30 a.m. 4 weeks from now. Can you give me something a little more civilized? Well, there's one opening 2.5 years from now at 9 a.m. So, okay, so 4 weeks from now, you show up at 6:30 a.m. and they make you wait till 8. Why? Because they can. At 8 a.m. the door opens and a nurse comes out who looks like Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Come on in. Knees knocking, you stagger into the room, and she has 2 buckets next to her. What are those for? Your blood. Why? Dracula might show up any point in time. Extracts half your blood. Anemic, you crawl back to your car, you drive back home, you don't hear from the lab for 4 weeks. You call them and say, I came in for a blood test. Could you give me the results? I said, no. You got to talk to your doctor to get the results. But it's my blood. No. So you call the doctor, you go through the game again, 6:30 a.m., 4 weeks from now, and you show up there, they make you wait an hour and a half, you walk in, the doctor's sitting there behind a desk, looking at your test, would you like to know the results? And after toying you for about 10 minutes, there's nothing wrong with you. Now don't get too relieved, because the ultimate indignity comes in about 4 weeks later, in the form of a bill. $1,500 to do what? Extract half my blood and tell me there's nothing wrong with me. So this is what this 19-year-old is going to do. She's going to change this business. She's going to take 2 drops of your blood, not 2 buckets. Put in a nanotainer. That already sounds a little fancy. Run 232 different tests in 45 minutes. Get you the results by email. It's almost like she's in the 21st century and charge you only $50 for the whole thing. She's going to revolutionize the business. It's not just you. As an added bonus, think of how this is going to change healthcare around the world. People can now get blood tests who couldn't do it before. Don't you want the story to be true? Not only because it disrupts a business you hate, but because it gives you, I have 1 daughter and 3 sons, and I have a daughter that I can point to, look, there's a 22-year-old billionaire who dropped out of Stanford and started a blood testing business. You can do it too. I wish I'd made up the story. It is a true story. The 19-year-old who dropped out of Stanford was Elizabeth Holmes. The company she created was called Theranos. And the rest of the description is actually on par. It was 2 drops of blood in a nanotainer. All these tests run quickly, $50 to $75, and was going to revolutionize blood testing. Excited a lot of people. Like whom? Venture capitalists. Pushed up the pricing of the company to almost $9 billion in the middle of 2015. But it wasn't just VCs. The Cleveland Clinic, one of America's leading healthcare organizations, said, hey, this Theranos thing is great. We're thinking of introducing Theranos tests into the Cleveland Clinic. Walgreens announced they were going to have a Theranos lab in every Walgreens. In the middle of 2015, he asked me, hey, what do you think of this Theranos? My response would have been, I don't know much about the company, but given the $9 billion pricing, the Cleveland Clinic imprint, and the fact that Walgreens is partnering with them, there must be something here. But let me ask you a question. If you're an investor in a blood testing company, what's a question you probably want answered before you start shoveling money into the company? It's a blood testing company. Does the test work? I thought somebody would have asked that question, but it turned out that I was wrong, because in October of 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter decides to ask that question. And it's actually a question where the answer was in the public domain, because if you're a blood testing company, you've got to get approval from the FDA for your test. So you went to the FDA and said, hey, look, on their website, they list all these tests they supposedly run. How many of these tests have they been approved for? And the FDA said 1. A herpes test, it seems to work. The rest, we haven't approved them yet. And he said, why? He said, the tests are a little noisy. So what's a noisy test? It's completely off color, but take it for what it's worth. It's like going for a leukemia test. The results come back, and here's what they say. You might have leukemia, or you might not. Don't worry too much about it. Come back in a year. It's not exactly something you look for in a blood test, right? Noisy blood tests are not a good feature. So he writes an article about this. Theranos not approved. Theranos, of course, threatens to sue. That was their classic modus operandi. Anybody said bad things, I'll sue you. It turned out that he was right and they were wrong. And in the next 6 months, disclosure after disclosure comes out that they've been cooking the results, that they hadn't been using their own tests, et cetera, et cetera. And 9 months later, the pricing had gone to 0. for the company. Cleveland Clinic said, we don't even know who they are. And Walgreens was saying, we're going to cut ties with them. And Elizabeth Holmes had been banned from the blood testing business for 3 years. And there is a very real possibility that she could end up in jail. So when that happened in October of 2015, right after the journal, so before the rest of the disclosures, I wrote a post on Theranos. And the first question I asked was, hey, how come nobody caught this? There's a board of directors in the company. Why didn't they ask the question? Then I took a look at the board, and the answer was actually in the very last column. My first reaction as I looked at this list was, he's still alive? George Shultz. Remember George Shultz? You don't remember George Shultz. Why? Because he was Secretary of State in 1981. How many of you were even, no, let me not even ask the question. I know the answer. None of you were born in 1981. He's a sprightly 94. I know, I'm not saying 94-year-olds can be really up, on top of the game, etc. But the cynical side of me saying, if you're a megalomaniac CEO, and remember, megalomania is not just restricted to men, it could be women as well. And you wanted to create a board that would never ask you a question, here's a tactic to consider. Pick a bunch of 80 to 90-year-olds, put them on your board, invite them for a board meeting. Put a pillow in front of every chair, just in case. Have a backup ambulance. Odds are you will never be asked a question. But here's the other question I asked. And this is what I mean by stories that can get away with you. I said, if in March of 2015, remember, Elizabeth Holmes was one of the most highly celebrated businesswomen in the world. I mean, she was she came and gave talks in big conferences. It wasn't just about business. It was very uplifting. I created a business. I'm a billionaire at 22, or 24, or whatever. So I said, if you'd been sitting in that room at Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes was talking about all the great things she was going to do with this. And remember, she was talking about changing the world, bringing blood tests to save people in Africa and Asia and all those part of the world where blood testing might have been too expensive to get to everybody. Would you have had the courage to put up your hand and ask the question, which is, does your blood, you'd have felt really small, right? You'd have felt like the guy who shot Bambi's mother. I've always felt for that guy. Have you ever seen this? The movie starts. If you've never seen it, you should see the movie just for that traumatic moment. It's actually traumatic for kids. Because Bambi's mother gets shot. You never see the hunter, but she falls with an arrow through her. I felt for that guy. He must have gone through trauma and psychiatric counseling because they made a movie about the consequences. The runaway stories, you don't want to ask the question because you're afraid of the answer. And if you think about the ingredients that made for this runaway story, first, there's a charismatic CEO. There's always one. Second, you have a really big story, something that's going to change the way the world is run. And third, there's always a social component. I'm going to make the world a better place. I might be cynical, but any time I hear a founder spending half his pitch talking about how he's going to make the world better, my antenna start to quiver. I mean, it's because this is exactly how you end up not asking questions. It's, don't you dare ask me questions. I'm going to solve world poverty. How dare you ask me about my margins? And that's why, it sounds cynical to do this, but if you make a big deal about how much you're going to change the world, my response is, hey, maybe you don't want to talk about your business model because you don't have one. So as you look at Theranos, this is not a one-off deal. Now, of course, it's that Wall Street Journal reporter is thanking his stars. He went to the FDA because he wrote a book on it. It's becoming a movie. I don't know who's starring in the movie. But Elizabeth Holmes actually had some very strange characteristics. Like she said, she had only one item in her wardrobe, 300 versions of it, a black turtleneck. Now, when you see black turtleneck, what do you think? Okay. She claims it was based on some 90s Pulp Fiction movie, something. But the reality is she was playing somebody else. And you can't tell me you're telling an authentic story and acting like Steve Jobs at the same time. So there were all these red flags we chose to ignore. But I'm saying that's understandable when you have these stories that take off. Now let me take another version of how improbable things can. Individually, you can have predictions, forecasts that look reasonable, but the sum of the predictions may not. And here's a very simple way to see how this can happen. Let's suppose you see a big market. You can give the big market a name. It could be ride sharing, it could be artificial intelligence, it could be online advertising, it could be China. You see a big market. And you're an entrepreneur. Any of you ex-entrepreneurs want to be entrepreneurs? No? You don't want to admit to it? But you do know some entrepreneurs, right? So let me ask you a question about entrepreneurs. Are entrepreneurs generally overconfident people or diffident people? You got to be overconfident almost by definition to be an entrepreneur, right? So you're an overconfident entrepreneur looking at a big market. What's your first reaction? I can conquer that market. You approach 3 venture capitalists. Again, I may ask you a generic question. Venture capitalists, do they tend to be overconfident people or diffident people? They're all not as bad as Mark Cuban, but they're Mark Cuban-like. So you approach 3 overconfident venture capitalists who think they can pick winners. They picked you. So now you have a cluster of 4 overconfident people looking at a big market. You think you're the only people who've noticed this big market? All across Silicon Valley, there are clusters of overconfident people looking at the same big market. You say, who cares? What does that mean when I say overconfident? You're overestimating your chances of winning in the market. You're overestimating your growth. If I did a valuation within each cluster, you think within that cluster you're making reasonable assumptions. But if I take all 100 clusters and add them together, what am I going to find? The sum of the values is going to be larger than the underlying business. And of course, you get the old-time value investors wagging their fingers, because this is the definition of a bubble. This is why we shouldn't have bubbles. But bubbles are a feature, not a bug. They're part of markets. And in case you ever run into somebody say, we shouldn't have bubbles, let's pass laws that prevent bubbles. My response is, would you want to live in a world run by actuaries? We'd still be in caves. The guy's looking at fire saying, you know what, it's not been tested yet. Let's wait another 3,000 years, make sure nothing bad happens, then we'll go out of the cave. Every bubble has changed some aspect of humanity. Take the dot-com bubble. It's written as a cautionary note, right? Did it change the way we live? Absolutely. Even the 2008 bubble, which really wasn't a bubble, it was a banking crisis, changed the way we live. But every bubble leaves an imprint that our changes. I mean, if you think about humanity changing, it's because overconfident people think they can do things that other people tell them cannot be done. I don't have a problem with bubbles. I think they're part of the markets. In fact, I have a problem with people who want the best of both. They want markets without bubbles. They want the capital you can raise without the chaos. I remember a conversation I had about 5 years ago in Singapore with the head of the Singapore Stock Exchange. He said, can I come and see you at the hotel? He came in and he said, we'd like to make Singapore a more happening financial market, a more exciting financial market. And I said, it's not going to happen. So why not? I said, because then you're going to be okay with chaos. You're Singapore. Singapore and chaos don't go together, right? This is like Disneyland on steroids. Everything works, everything runs on time. But the nature of financial markets, you got to live with people overestimating, correcting, losses, bubbles bursting, and hope that the net is a plus. But that's how financial markets evolve and change. In fact, I took the online advertising market about 5 years ago, and I did a very simple exercise. I took the market cap of every online advertising company, and this includes the big ones, the Google, the Facebook. I took the market cap, and I reverse engineered how much the revenues would have to be in year 10. In fact, you can do this in my spreadsheet, because you can, using the solver function, you can ask what would the revenues in year 10 have to be to justify the price today. You'd have to assume everything else about the company, but so I solved for those imputed revenues in 10 years. You add up those imputed revenues, and this is just the existing publicly traded companies then, the imputed revenues of the entire online advertising market would have to be $389 billion. And if you bring in the rest of the mix of private companies who are waiting in the wings, you come up with a total size for the online advertising market of about $522 billion. You're saying, so what? At the time that I did this, the entire online advertising market globally was about $200 billion. So the question you've got to ask is it conceivable that this market can even get to $522 billion? If the answer is no, what is the collective judgment? That collectively these companies are overvalued. Does it mean you should avoid all of them? No, because it means that some of them could win, but they can't all win. And the reason this happens is when you value companies, you probably even notice with your company, after a while you get so immersed in the company, you forget that the rest of the world also reacts to many of the things you're seeing. You plot out the strategy plan for your company. If I do this, this, and this is going to happen. But then it's like game theory, right? You do things and so it's actually part of the process of adjusting. Every young market I've seen, even in my 32 years watching these markets, I've seen this happen. The first market I saw this happen was the PC market. At one point in time, the personal computer market was viewed as this high, especially in the early 80s, because people didn't have computers. And people said, there's going to be a huge market, any PC company is going to be worth a lot, and then you saw the game play out. Then you saw .com and social media, now you're seeing it with artificial intelligence. And it is part of the process of adjusting to a new big business. One final slide and then we can move on. When I look at DCFs, one of the things I'm constantly checking, and just like on your DCF, is does this DCF tell me a story that is internally plausible, probable? So I've talked about Tesla off and on in this class. It's a company that I valued. I like the company. Okay? But it's a company that I describe as the equivalent of a teenager. It's got lots of potential, but it constantly tries to kill itself by doing stupid things. So I've had 4 teenagers go through and you can tell them, be sensible, don't go drinking when you're less than 21 and be caught, and at least don't get caught. No. But teenagers have absolutely no perception. And this is especially true if you have teenage boys, because teenage girls may get a little more sense earlier. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe I have a unique girl, but no. It's a teenage company. But it's a company with a lot of potential. So I valued off and on. This was about 5 years ago. I valued the company at about $150 per share, which actually is a significant value for a company that at that time was selling only 24,000 cars. So I put out the value, and about a week later, I see an equity research report come out on Tesla, which put the value of Tesla at $600 per share. So I'm curious as to how this analyst, remember we talked about Stockholm Syndrome? Tesla's analysts are particularly susceptible to the Stockholm Syndrome, and this guy who did this equity research report was a classic case. So he put out the equity research reports. I'm curious, I pick up his equity research report, and I'm almost all of it. It's 250 pages thick, which already should have told me he had something to hide. So I was browsing through, and I come to page 53. There was a lot of stories and pictures and stories and pictures. I talk about storytelling, but that's not the kind of storytelling, right? And then you get to page 53, and he said he had done a D.C.F. That's how he called it. So I decided to stay with this terminology. I said, this is where I live. Let me take a look at your D.C.F. to see why your value is 4 times higher than mine. So I start with the revenues. And he has a pretty big story to tell about Tesla, where the number of cars Tesla is going to sell goes from 24,000 to 1.1 million. We pause right there. Is that a plausible story by itself? Car market is huge. Volkswagen sells 2.3 million cars. Could I tell a story about Tesla that would make... But then, if I were fleshing out the story, it's got to be some kind of mass market automobile, the $35,000 Tesla 3 that we haven't seen kind of thing. But I could see it. Maybe you're optimistic. It's your story. So I said, okay. I looked at his revenues, and his revenues are actually pretty close to my estimates of revenue. So I was telling a big story. He was telling an equally big story. So I said, maybe he's giving Tesla tech company margins. There is a story you can tell about Tesla where they have robots in factories. Remember the original story before Elon changed his mind about robots in factories? where his margins could, so maybe he's giving them 25% margin. I looked at his margins, and his margins were actually a little lower than, now I'm befuddled. His revenues are pretty close to mine. His margins are actually a little lower than mine. How is he getting a DCF value that is 4 times higher than mine? So I keep going down. And I check the difference between an after-tax operating income and the free cash flow of the firm. I'll give you a clue. When you send in your Excel spreadsheets, especially if it's a spreadsheet you built, I'm not even wasting my time with those 15 line items you put in. I'm just doing your after-tax EBIT and your free cash flow to the firm. What does that tell me? It's what you're collectively putting back in the business. Whether you put in CapEx or R&D, you can dance all the dances you want, but that, so I looked at the collective after-tax operating income for the next 15 years and the collective free cash flow to the firm for the next 15 years, and the two numbers are almost the same, which tells me what? You're reinvesting close to nothing. Houston, I think we have a problem. And here's the problem. The number of cars has to go from about 24,000 to 1.1 million. They have one really big plant in Fremont. But on its very best day, that plant can produce about 250,000 cars. You see what the problem is? You've got 850,000 cars that have to magically appear. So I called the analyst, and he was at an airport on his way to California, I think to visit the Tesla shrine. There's one somewhere over here probably that you come and pray at, oh great Elon in the sky kind of thing. So I said, look, and I've been looking at your equity research report, at your D.C.F, just to make sure that I wasn't talking about something else. And I said, can I ask you a few questions about the numbers? He said, I can't answer those questions. And I said, why? Your name's on the report. He says, there's a team that does the DCF for me. I said, really? You have a team that joined it? He said, a team of 5. I said, can I call you when your team's with you so I can ask the question? He said, sure, I'll be back next week. So I get ready to hang up. He said, you're not going to write about this on your blog or anything, are you? I said, I'll give you a week and then I'll write about it. So I call him a week later, and the team has gathered around. So the lead analyst comes on, and he says, look, I don't do the numbers here. I said, what do you do? And he described what he did, and it turned out he was the chief schmoozer. He schmoozed a lot. Yeah. Then the second in command comes in, and he says, you know what? I'm the secondary schmoozer. I go with that guy, and when he schmoozes, I schmooze with him. The third guy says, I'm the backup schmoozer. One of them can't show up, I schmooze. I said, who in this group does the numbers? And they point to this 24-year-old kid they hired out of Wharton. And they said, he's the one. I feel sorry for this kid now. So I lead him through the process, and he's smart. He gets it. I said, what happened? He said, it slipped my mind. I said, what do you mean it slipped your mind? He said, I took last year's CapEx and depreciation, and I projected them out, because that's what I was taught to do when I did financial modeling. You know what happened last year? That prior year that he'd used as his base year, Tesla had not built any assembly plants, so the CapEx was pretty close to depreciation, so he projected out. And he said, don't you think you have a problem? He said, I know we have a problem, but I don't see how we publicly admit to the fact that it slipped our mind to build assembly plants. So I gave him a suggestion, which he did not take. I said, have you ever watched Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory? He hadn't, he was too young, the Gene Wilder version. But one of the older analysts said, yeah, I've seen the movie. I said, when I saw that movie, I was a strange young person, now I'm a strange older person. I remember coming out of that movie with a big question. Willy Wonka chocolates were in every store in the world, but there was only one factory. And a very, very inefficiently laid out factory with like a chocolate river running through it. And I remember asking the question, how the heck did they make all those chocolates in that one factory? In fact, the 7th floor, you took off from the 7th floor, like a roof flying off. And the answer is actually in the movie. What's the reason? How are they able to make the chocolates? It's a Oompa Loompa. So if you've never seen an Oompa Loompa, you have a missing piece in your life. Just go on YouTube, type the word Oompa Loompas, and you will see the Oompa Loompa song. They actually sing, and they dance, and while they sing and dance, chocolates come flying out. So I said, here's what you need to do. Put out a press release that Tesla has fired all its Fremont workers and replaced them with Oompa Loompas. I call these Oompa Loompa valuations because that's the only way you can reconcile that huge revenue growth to the fact that you're not putting any money back in the business. This is an impossible valuation. So here's my suggestion. Don't let the name on top of a valuation intimidate you. Impossible valuations. I mean, if this valuation had been turned in Friday, do you think I'd waste my time checking your cost of capital? What's the point? If you're churning out 850,000 cars without building assembly plants, you are an amazing company. I will invest in you at any price because you are magical. There are some valuations where at the point of looking at the big story, you can say, I'm not even going to go in with you into the weeds because it's pointless. So now I'm going to connect my story to numbers. So let's take the Tesla story. Remember I described it as an urban car service company? My total market was the urban car service market in 2014. And I estimated it to be $100 billion. You notice the word I used? I estimate. You say, why don't you look it up? It's almost impossible, at least in 2014, it was almost impossible to get a number on this market. Because in 2014, here's how the market was structured. Each city had cab services. And the cab services provided, nobody was keeping track of a global market. It was not corporate, it was not public. So I actually had to go city by city because they actually keep track. So New York, and I was able to get this for perhaps 30 or 40 cities. And after that, I ran out of steam and energy. I just extrapolated from that. So am I making up stuff? Sure. But I'm making it up on hopefully something that makes sense. I came up with $100 billion to show you how insidious Google search is. When I look for numbers for total market, nothing showed up. Then I do my Uber valuation. 6 months later, go to Google search. Maybe they have a better estimate. Say, size of the urban car service market. Guess what pops up? $100 billion. Demodrine estimates. Here's what you should get out of it. I know how crappy this estimate is. But Google search, people say $100 billion. We take numbers off Google and we think they're real. But the reality is in businesses like this, you're making your best judgment. And sometimes those judgments are going to be completely screwed up. So that's my total market. I let it grow at 6% a year, as opposed to the 2% it was growing at. Why? Because the second part of my story, if you remember, it's going to attract new users into the business, people like my son and my niece. That's a 6% growth. But in my original story, I was assuming that the new users who would be attracted into the company would be young, tech-savvy individuals who didn't like to take the traditional cab service. My story has shifted over time, and I'll talk about why. But in 2014, that was my story. I showed as a higher growth rate. I also assumed that Uber would have local networking benefits. Sounded like I was dancing on the top of a pin, but there's a reason why I made that point about local. Is in my story, here's what can happen. A dozen ride-sharing companies can dominate different parts of the world, which means when I give a market share to Uber, I can't give it a 40 or a 50% market share. I give it a 10% market share. I did also assume they could continue to collect 20% of the fare, which is completely arbitrary, but I assume that it's going to stick. And if that stays sticking, then in steady state, once they get past the pains, it'll give them a huge margin because they get that for doing pretty much nothing. I also assumed they could continue not to own the cars or hire the drivers. And the way this manifests itself is they can grow with very little reinvestment. For Uber to go into a new city, all they need to do is hire a guy, put him in a motel. That's how they built up the Delhi Uber. They hired a guy, they didn't even have an office. They put him in a motel. That's why when they had a problem in Delhi and the Delhi government was trying to find the Uber offices, they sent him to a motel room saying, hey, that's our office right there, that guy you find there. Because it is a low, and the way I showed this is because they can get lots of revenues with very little reinvestment, I allow them to get $5 of revenues for every dollar of capital invested, which is 2 times higher than what a typical tech company gets, and 4 times higher than what a typical manufacturing company gets. My story is essentially become numbers. Then I needed a cost of capital. And I spent all of 1 minute estimating it. Why? Because this is not what's going to make or break my story. You're valuing a young company, don't spend half your time saying, what beta should I use? You say, how do you come up with the 12%? I have a histogram of cost of capital for all US companies. I went to the 90th percentile, and it's a risky company. The 90th percentile is 12%. I'm going to give you a high cost of capital. And I'll come back to it if I have the time, but I never got the time. So I left it at 12%. But here's the final piece that I had to bring in. When I do a discounted cash flow valuation, I assume my company will make it as a going concern. That's implicit in a DCF. And this is a young, money-losing company. Is there a chance they might not make it? Sure. I gave them a 10% chance. You're saying, why so low? Because they have a $17 billion pricing. One of the ironies with young companies is the more pricing I give you, the greater the chance you will survive. You know why? Because VCs, if they lose, will lose a lot more money. So if you get into trouble, they will actually keep shoveling money into you. That's the only way you can explain MoviePass. Today they issued some shares at 0.006 cents a share. And you know what? 0.006 cents is 0.006 cents more than the stock is worth. A 10% chance. I've converted every part of my story into a number. So when you see the valuation, it looks like an Excel spreadsheet, right? Revenue growth, margins, but every number in this valuation has a story behind it. So if you ask me, why are my revenues $3.7 billion in year 10? The story you're going to get from me, it's an urban car service company with local networking benefits. Why are my margins so high? Because they get to keep 20% of the fare. They don't essentially hire the driver, so they don't have to pay any of the employment taxes. High margins. Why is my market share 10%? Because it has local networking benefits. Every number in this story, if you ask me a question, I'm going to come back with a part of the story. So I finish it, and I come up with a value of about $6 billion. Do you remember what the original story that triggered my interest in Uber was? VCs had invested in Uber and priced it at $17 billion. So I put this out. About 3:20 in the afternoon, June 8th was a Friday, I think. I put it out, and 20 minutes later, I got a call from a Wall Street Journal reporter. She must have been just waiting at her desk for the blog post to come out. She said, I noticed you valued Uber. I said, thank you for noticing. She said, I do notice you put a $6 billion value on Uber. I said, you're very observant. Then she said, you do know that venture capitalists have valued the company at $17 billion. I almost corrected her right there. You know, with what? Venture capitalists don't value companies. But she's a journalist, so I cut her some slack. I said, yes, I do know they valued $17 billion. So how do you explain the $17 billion? I said, I don't have to. I didn't pay it. I've never felt the urge to go around explaining what other people pay. Why are you asking me? This is something I don't quite get. People call and say, why is Bitcoin at 3,500? Why don't you ask somebody who paid the 3,500? Why are you asking me? It's not my job to explain what other people pay. So she says, are you telling me they're wrong? I said, I'm telling you nothing of the sort. I'm saying with my story and my value, I would not invest in Uber. Maybe they have a bigger story and a bigger value. But I can't second guess that. It's actually something I have to remind myself. When I do a valuation, I have my valuation based on my story. I don't have the valuation based on the story. I don't have a monopoly on the story. So $6 billion was my value, June 8th of 2014. Almost done, right? So let's suppose you get to this point, hopefully by Friday. You tell a story, you convert numbers, you finish a valuation, you send it in to me. What are you hoping for as response? Amazing. This is exactly how I'd value a company too. And guess what? If you hang out with people who keep telling you that, you're hanging out with the wrong people. My advice to you is when you finish a valuation, seek out people who don't think like you. Which often means you've got to leave the office and probably walk onto the street. Let them tell you what they think about the valuation. Be ready to duck. Because you'll have things thrown at you, physically or metaphorically, because they're not going to get it. And keep listening, because this is how you make your stories better. So in the case of Uber, I got incredibly lucky. It got picked up in 4 very different places. That same blog post, same valuation. The first was a site called 538.com. You familiar with the site? It's run by a guy called Nate Silver, who used to work at the New York Times. It's the ultimate statistics geek site. Because basically what he does, he takes statistics, applies. It's a great site. If you love numbers, he applies statistics to things like, you know, the legend of the hot hand in basketball. Have you heard of this? That when somebody gets a hot hand and they shoot, everything goes in. And he takes things like that. Is that true? So he actually takes the numbers to work it out. So it's actually fascinating to see those numbers play out. So the person who runs the site said, no, I'd like to run your blog post. It's something that our readers would like. I said, sure, go ahead. The second place it got picked up was the Forbes blog. Who reads the Forbes blog? I think 75-year-olds with flip phones predominantly. It's a really old-time value investing crowd who's still very attached to dividends and Ben Graham security analysis. Same blog post, same valuation. The third place it got picked up was TechCrunch. Heard of TechCrunch? TechCrunch is a digital magazine read mostly by geeks and VCs in Silicon Valley. And the fourth place it got picked up is a site called the Ride Sharing Guide. It's still around. If you get a chance, go on to it. It's a site maintained for just Uber and Lyft drivers. There are so many of them that you can just write for them. Same post, same valuation, 4 different places. I get 4 very different sets of reaction. On the 538 site, here's the kind of response I get. I noticed you used a 12% cost of capital, but in your histogram, the 90th percentile was 11.97%. Why didn't you use 11.97%? That's how numbers geek think, 11. And I leave my spreadsheet open precisely for that reason, which is why don't you go change the 12 to 11.97% and tell me what happens. 5 minutes later, I get an email back saying, nothing happened. I see why you did it. So nothing learned there because people were dancing around the numbers. The Forbes blog, they loved it. They said, this is how those tech guys should be doing things. I didn't even waste my time there. The TechCrunch guys absolutely hated it. Their response was, how dare you value one of ours with your D.C.F. We don't do that in Silicon Valley. That's so old economy. There were 4,000 comments on the TechCrunch article. Half were pure insults, most of which I didn't even get. Like you New Yorker. How did I become a New Yorker? You DCF guy. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You academic, you theorist. It's amazing what people think is an insult. Is that an insult? I don't even know. But the other 2,000 started with an insult, like you idiot, but then proceeded to tell me things about the ride-sharing business I would not have known otherwise. I'm not a tech person. They told me how Uber set surge prices. I learned about the insides of this business a way I would not have been able to learn if I never got past the insults. And of the ride-sharing guy, I heard from Uber and Lyft drivers. And I heard some very interesting things that I would never have learned if I just talked to Uber management. There was an Uber driver from LA who wrote to me and he said, I read your post and I noticed you kept 20% of the gross billings as revenue for Uber. But he said, I don't think that's true because here's what happened in LA. Until 2 weeks ago, I was driving for Lyft. Uber paid me $2,500 to switch. Now, Lyft is offering me $3,000 to switch back. And I'm a free agent without a contract. So tomorrow, he said, by the time all this is spent and done, he said, I'd be surprised if they make more than 7 or 8% of the gross billing. 3 years later, there's a leaked number that comes out of Uber about their contribution margin, which basically captures how much of the revenues they're keeping. And guess what Uber announced 3 years later? That their contribution margin is about 7 to 8%. To which my response is, I heard it from your Uber driver 3 years ago. I've never talked to the top management of a company I valued for 2 reasons. One is you're going to hear a lot of PR crap. What CEO is going to say, I'm a terrible CEO, let me tell you how I'm going to ruin the company. The second is you're beholden then to the management because once they talk to you, they say, well, I need to see your valuation before I can sign off on it because I gave you information. If I go to a company, I'm going to hang out in the mail room and talk to the guy who delivers mail saying, hey, how many of these people actually show up at their desks? What do they do while they're here? I might learn more about the company talking to the parking lot attendant than to the CEO. It all came to fruition for me in the case of Uber. About 2 months after I'd done the valuation of Uber, not even 2 months, about a month, I was in Munich airport waiting for a connecting flight. And my flight was delayed. And delayed and delayed. So finally I decided to check my emails, which I should never do because I always run over my data limits. So I checked my emails and there's an email from a guy called Bill Gurley. For those of you who don't know who Bill is, he's a partner at Benchmark Capital, which was actually one of the first VCs to invest in Uber. They invested in Uber at $1 billion pricing. He was on the board of directors of Uber in 2014. and rumored to be the person closest to Travis Kalanick at Uber. So let me ask you an easy question. Does Bill Gurley know more about Uber than I do? Absolutely. So open the email, and here's how it begins. I read your blog post on Uber, and I did not like it. So, okay, we got that out of the way. So I've written my own blog post to counter your blog post. Blog post to blog post warfare, very high tech. I've said some mean things about you, and I just wanted to let you know. Sincerely, Bill. I close the email. I have an hour and a half left for my flight. Guess where I go next? I go to Bill's blog. It's called Above the Crowd. He's actually 6'6", so there's a reason he calls it Above the Crowd. And I read his post. And I was fascinated because he was telling a story that pushed back on every part of my story. He said, Uber is not a car service company, it's a logistics company. Notice how words have consequences? By using the word logistics, what have you just told me? We're in the car service business, the moving business, the delivery business. He said, we're not just going to be urban, we're going to be everywhere. He gave examples of suburban and rural services. And he said, we're going to take our domination in big cities and we're going to translate into domination in others by connecting up with credit cards, companies, and airlines. He gave the example of we're going to connect up with United. So when you make that reservation to fly from New York to Jakarta, right after you've checked that box of I don't want to be dragged off the plane, which I think is an option in United now, you can check another box that says I want an Uber car waiting for me in Jakarta when I land. It's a very clever way of saying if we end up dominating big cities, we can translate that domination elsewhere, which basically makes your local networking benefits into global ones. I was fascinated. Along the way, he took a few swipes at me, many of them actually. But if I got past those, so I finished reading it. And I emailed Bill and I said, I loved your blog post, which is not, I think, the response he was expecting. And I said, do you want me to convert your story into a number? He said, what are you talking about? I said, you've told a really big story about Uber. I can make it into a number. He said, be my guest. So I went in and changed two numbers. Remember that $100 billion total market I used as an urban car service company? I tripled it. That's what moving and delivery brings in. And those markets I was able to actually find numbers because they're more established markets. We have public companies in the space. I tripled the total market. Remember the 10% market share I capped at? In my story, in his story, there are going to be only 3 or 4 big players around the world. I gave Uber a 40% market share. And with those two changes put in, the value that I got was $53 billion. And he did talk about the possibility that Uber could actually replace that second car because you no longer needed it. And I said, that might add to the $53 billion, make it even larger, maybe $60 billion. So I sent it to him. I'm still sitting in Munich airport while all of this is going on. I sent it to him and I said, do you like this more? He said, a lot. And he said, you know what, that 80-20 mix, probably going to come under pressure, probably going to become 90. I almost told him, your Uber driver in LA told me that already. But I said, that's easy to fix. It's an input into my spreadsheet. I'll make 80-20 into 90-10. I get a value of $29 billion. So when I wrote this post, which is a month after my original post, what some people got out of it was, hey, this is why you shouldn't do DCF because you can get any number you want. That's not the way I read it. The way I read it is with young companies, the way you frame your story can give you a very different value. It doesn't mean it's a plausible value because now you got to deliver on that much bigger story. But if you ask me as a founder, what will give me the biggest pricing for my company, and that's all you care about right now, is I'm going to tell a really big story. Never use the word car service. Use the word transportation, logistics. Keep the words big. Keep it global. Don't tell you want to be global big business. You're going to have a bigger pricing, but then you have a challenge after you've sold the story. You've raised the money. What do you need to do now? You need to deliver globally. This is exactly what Uber dug itself into, right? And Lyft, in contrast, decided to go with a narrower, smaller, more compact story. It made its life a lot easier. But purely on a pricing basis, you can see how stories frame numbers. In fact, at the end of 2014, I wrote, have you ever been to a Build-A-Bear store in a mall? They're creepy little places, if you ask me. You go in with your 6-year-old, they give them a piece of skin to stuff. 30 minutes later, you got the ugliest bear ever made. And then they do the really sneaky thing. They come up to you and say, you don't have to buy this bear. But if you want it, it'll cost you $75. You got your 6-year-old who's just created this bear. There's no way you're leaving the store without the bear. So 5 minutes later, you paid $60 or $75 for the ugliest looking bear ever made. So I decided to do a build your own valuation of Uber. And here's what I did. The blog post is still on if you want to go play with it. At each step, I let you, as the reader, pick what Uber was. I said, I have a story for Uber. It's my story. What do you think about Uber? Because I got so many people telling me that they didn't like my story. I said, okay, you pick your own story. Tell me what you think. Is it a logistics company, transportation company, a car service company? You make that pick. Does it have no networking benefits, local, global? Does it have strong competitive advantage? And at the end of the post, I took the choices you made and said, this is the number that goes with your story. And take a look at that last column. The value for Uber can be anywhere from less than $1 billion to over $90 billion, depending on how you frame the story. Again, the answer is not that any number goes, but it also means it's hubris to ever tell somebody at the young company, this is a bubble. I'm in no position to tell you that. I can tell you with my story I wouldn't pay that. But if you have a really big story, I can see why you could end up with a very different number. That's the part about I call this keeping the feedback loop open. The kind of feedback you're going to get from me is just the start, right? So show your valuation to people so if you're valuing Workday, show it to somebody who works at Workday. Show it to venture capitalists. Show it to a cab driver. I don't know. Show it to anybody who really is not in your space, because you're going to get information you otherwise would not get by talking to them. And that's, I think, the key to making your story more real. Uber and Lyft drivers around the world must hate me because wherever I go, I have very little loyalty. I try both. Which one is cheaper? I pick that. I get in the car and I harass this poor guy all the way through. I said, do you drive for Uber and Lyft? How much do they pay? Because this is my research. This is how I find out if they're complaining about how little money they make. When I value Lyft, that's got to be part of what I build into the process. Because a ride-sharing company with unhappy drivers is not a good place to be in. But if you ask the Lyft top management, are your drivers happy? What are you going to get? They'll love it. In fact, Uber keeps putting out, you can make a decent living. There are some Uber drivers that make $70,000 a year by doing what? Driving 31 hours a day? Okay. It's not the norm, but in a sense, the best way to find out is actually talk to people in the business. And as I said, your story is not done on Friday. It will evolve. Because one of three things can happen to your story. The first is the most drastic. Your story might break. You're valuing a young drug company with a promising drug for diabetes working its way through the pipeline. What might happen next week? You could get an announcement from the company saying, we're suspending the drug test because 2 people got really sick from it. Hey, forget about young companies. Last week, did you see what happened to Biogen? When take a look at the story. Their Alzheimer's drug, which had huge potential, they pulled the drug because they said it's not working. It's actually creating harm. We can no longer continue it. They lost 25% of their market value in one day. In 1 minute, right after the announcement came out. That's a story break. And I'll give you 2 very small examples of story breaks. I've heard of a company called Aereo. About 6 or 7 years ago, Aereo is a company that was created that claimed to have come up with a way where you could watch cable channels on your device without paying cable fees. They claimed to have found some loophole where they could carry all those channels that Verizon or Time Warner were carrying, and you could watch them on your phone and not pay. Doesn't sound too good to be true. But they showed, in fact, it was working. People could watch cable channels. And of course, the cable companies disagreed. Aereo's market pricing by venture capital was pushed up to $1.5 billion or $2 billion because it looked promising. The cable company sued. It got all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I think in early 2000, summer of 2014, the Supreme Court found that what Aereo was doing was illegal. Overnight, the pricing went to 0. Here's another example. You decide to invest in the cheating business. The cheating business is a big business. People cheat on each other. Ashley Madison. 4 years ago. Ashley Madison was a rising company. Venture capitalists priced the company at $1.5 billion. If you've never heard of Ashley Madison, good. If you've heard about it a lot, I don't want to know. Okay? They pushed it up because there are a lot of cheaters in the world, and this is a business that networks cheaters. Think of it as a pre-Tinder device for people who shouldn't be using Tinder. Right? So pricing got pushed up, investors invested. Until you got to the early part of 2015, when Ashley Madison had a bit of a problem. You know what it was? People hacked into their computer, got the names of every cheater on their database, and made it public. Now, this is not a great development. If you're a cheating company, their pricing collapsed by almost 80%. You say, why didn't it go to zero? Because there was a subset of cheaters that actually liked this. They said, I'm the biggest cheater. Look, I'm on there 75 times, 90. So if you took that small subsample out of people, you destroyed the pricing. So could this happen to your company, a break? It could if you have a small company. It's unlikely with a big company, but I'm always wary about this. As a Boeing investor, was the 737 MAX a shift in the story or a break in the story? Because let's face it, it is their best-selling jet. If there's something fundamentally wrong with it, we have a catastrophic problem with the valuation. If it's something you can fix with the software, not a big deal. But story breaks, your story is done, your value goes away. You can have story shifts. What's a story shift? I think what happened at Apple yesterday was a story shift, which basically means the basic contours of my story are not changing. It's still a cash machine. You're still a mature company. This might give you a few basis points on the edge, a slightly higher growth rate, maybe slightly lower margins. And then you have a story change where you show me you can do something I did not think you could do. If Apple had announced yesterday that they were getting into the car market by buying Tesla, the first thing I'd have done is have sold my Apple stock right away. But now following up on that, that's a story, that you're changing your story. And that could effectively mean I've got to go back to brass tacks to value you because now you're a different company. So think about stories and connecting them to numbers because it does drive your valuation. So finally, we're ready to value. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to waste my time in the brass tacks again because we've spent enough time on how to compute free cash flow, how to compute cost of capital. I'm going to value a bunch of companies, and as I go through, you're going to see my equity risk premium changing as I go across valuations. I'm going to give you a preview as to why it's changing. If any of my valuations are pre-1998 valuations, don't be surprised to see a 5.5% equity risk premium. Those were much more peaceful times. I thought that developed market risk premiums didn't change very much. I used to historical premium and stayed with 5.5%. Since 98, I've shifted away to implied premiums. Between 2001 and 2008, if you remember, the equity risk premium was around 4%, so you're going to see a lot of 4% premiums from valuations then. Post 2008, depending on when the valuation happens, you'll see very different numbers because the monthly premiums shift from month to month. So as you look at these equity risk premiums, it just reflects the fact that different valuations are done in different points in time. So my objective with each of these companies is here's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to show you a valuation. In some of them I'll be explicit about the story, but most of them the story is going to kind of tell itself. By now you can look at my numbers and tell the story, but with each one I'm going to emphasize a different aspect of the valuation. And it'll be an aspect that you have already run into or you will run into. So let's start easy. Let's put our training wheels on and let's value a very simple company. A company which essentially pays out its free cash flow equity as dividends and is a mature company. I'm going to value Con Ed. Con Ed is a regulated utility. I'm going to value it as a mature dividend paying company. In fact, I'm going to use a stable growth dividend discount model. But before I do that, I want to make sure that it's a company that fits what I need to use a stable growth dividend discount model. First, if it's a mature company and I look at its payout ratio, what kind of payout ratio should I expect to see if I'm going to use a dividend discount model? If it's mature and it's growing slowly, I should see a high payout ratio. Check one, 73% payout ratio. In fact, I checked the dividends against the free cash flow equity to make sure they weren't paying too much or too little. And they paid almost their entire free cash flow equity as dividends. Check one, I'm okay using dividends that are roughly equal to free cash flow equity, and they're behaving like a mature company. Second stop. If you're a mature company, you need to grow at a rate less than or equal to the economy, right? So I took the retention ratio at Con Ed. They're retaining 27%. I took their return equity, which is roughly equal to the cost of equity. You know why that is true for a lot of regulated utilities? What's a regulated part in the front of the utility tell you? You don't have pricing power. You actually have to go in front of a commission that decides whether you can raise prices. And you know what they base it on? What your cost of equity is, and they allow you to earn a return equity roughly equal to the cost of equity. So it's almost by design, you're not allowed to earn more than the cost of equity. Of course, utility companies have become very clever at making the cost of equity look higher than it should be. But the return equity of 7, you take the product of the retention ratio and the return equity, you get a growth rate of about 2.1%. Again, consistent with a mature company, less than my risk-free rate. Third stop, I want to make sure you have a cost of equity like that of a mature company. What does that mean? Your beta should be pretty close to 1, and the cost of equity that I get for Con Ed is about 7.7%. Check 3. So it's paying dividends roughly equal to free cash flow equity and a lot of dividends. It's growing slowly, and it's got a cost of equity of a mature company. I got lucky, because then the value of the company is just the expected dividend 1 year out, which is $2.32 growing out a year, divided by the difference between the cost of equity and the growth rate. I get $42.30. You think I should have picked Con Ed. Some of you can change your mind and say, why don't I just value Con Ed? I'll be done by this evening. And you could. I mean, I'm not going to stop you if you wanted to, but you're not going to learn a whole lot about valuation from doing this. But at this stage, you're halfway through your last semester, you're saying, I don't care if I learn a lot, I just want to get done. So if you run into real trouble with your company and it's Thursday night and you say, you know what, just pick Con Ed, use a dividend discount model. It's going to give you that. That value was actually about $1.50 higher than the stock price. So I'm going to take that value and the price and ask a couple of questions. I got a value different from the price, right? And I'll wager for most of you that's going to be true. For some of you, your value is going to be exactly equal to the price, and I'm going to get very suspicious about how you got that. But for the most part, your value is going to be different from the price. But one of the questions you might ask when your value is different from the price is, what am I assuming that is different from the market? So here's what I did. I took the stock price. The one number that I'm a little uncertain about is, will my growth actually be 2.1%? Maybe it's going to be 1.8%, 1.6%. I solved for the growth rate they would need to get to a 40/76. It's called an implied growth rate. You can do this on any variable in your valuation. So if you think margin is the number you're most uncertain about, you can say, what would the margin in my company have to be to justify the price? It's like solving for an IRR, but you have to use the solver or the goal-seek function in Excel. But it's just a great way of figuring out what that break-even point is. But after you get that break-even, in this case, that break-even point is about 1.9%. I still have a question. What's the question? My estimate is 2.1%. The market is assuming 1.9%. Is the difference large enough that I actually want to jump in and make a bet on that difference? And with Con Ed, what do you think my answer was? It's not big enough. 1.9, 2.1, that's like noise in this process. But let's say the market was assuming only 0.4%, and I got 2.1%. To the extent that I buy into my own story, I would buy the stock. Any of you plan to go into sell-side equity research? Okay. Sell-side equity research, you put target prices, right? That's the standard practice. And in discounted cash flow valuation, you get the value per share today. So let's say it's 6 months out. You're doing Con Ed. You come up with the value per share of 40.76. You show it to me, I'm your managing director. I'm a jerk. I say, we don't do DCF value today. I want a target price a year from now. Is there a way in which you can take that 40.230 that you estimate as a DCF value and convert to a target price? And I'll help you out. Your cost of equity is 7.7%. And your expected dividend is going to be about $2.38, or whatever it works out at, $2.32 growing at 6%. Is there a way you can use that to come up with a target price? You want to try? You have to adjust for the next dividend and you discount one for good less. Actually, it's very simple, right? When you come up with the value per share today, at that value, what are you going to earn every year? What's the definition of fair value? You will earn your cost of equity every year, right? So you're going to earn 7.7%. So all you need to do to get a target price is take the 42.30, grow it at 7.7% for 1 year, and because a portion comes from dividends, subtract out the dividend. So in effect, you're saying, is the 2% I'm getting from dividends, and remaining 5.1% is a price appreciation. I get an expected price a year from now. In fact, you can do target prices 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's one of those things it's worth trying in your DCF. Is a DCF value gives you a value per share today, but you can make it target prices at any point in time by bringing in that expected return. That's your cost of equity, your cost of capital, and subtracting out the cash flow. In fact, if you believe your own valuation, ask you, if I bought the shares today, what would I make as a return? You're going to take the price today, you're going to look at the target price you came up with, and you can actually convert and say, if you buy the stock today, your return is going to be roughly 9.8% or 10.1, higher than the 7.7. And the reason I emphasize that is, remember a few weeks ago I did the Kraft Heinz valuation, and I came up, I don't even remember what the number was. I think it was around $30, or $32. And I actually in my blog post said, if the stock drops to 30, I will buy the stock. And one of the comments I got was, why would you buy the stock if the stock drops? Because you're going to make only the 2 divided by 30, which is what, 6.67%. I can do much better than that. But if you think about it, if I buy the stock at 30 and its value is 32 and I hold the stock for a year, I'm not making 6.67%. I'm making 6.67% plus whatever the cost of equity is. So when you find your stock to be undervalued, take that extra step. It's basically not just undervalued. Your return, if you buy it and it's truly undervalued, will be far more than your cost of equity. That was my first stop. Let's do a second stop. I valued 3M on September 12th of 2008. What's so special about the day? It was my last day of innocence. Why? Because it was the last day that I believed that your developed markets and emerging markets and never the twain shall meet. It's the day before the crisis started. So I valued the stock, and I won't go through the specifics, but you know what 3M does, right? Really boring things that make a lot of money. Like the Post-it note. Things like, I could have done that, but you didn't. They did. And they patented it now. So it's a solid office products / household products company. And I valued it as such. So I gave it a growth rate for the next 5 years of about 7.5%, not high. So if you think about the story I'm telling, it's a growth story, but it's mild growth because it's a big company in a fairly mature market with sustained margins and a fairly low cost of equity. So with that story, the value that I got was about $83.55. Notice the 55 cents, it's just for show. It's around $84. The stock was trading at 70. I actually did this around midday on September 12th. I actually wanted to buy the stock, but I forgot all about it, which is great for me. Because at 4 o'clock I went off home and I said, oh my God, I should have bought the stock, I forgot. And sometimes what you forget can save you a lot more money than what you remember. Because over the weekend, the market melted down. Because by Monday morning, you woke up to the Lehman collapse and the market melting down. So September 12th, the value was 84. The stock was at 70. Month later, I decided to revalue 3M. None of the numbers in the company had changed. It was still the same financials. No information had come out. But the market had gone into a tailspin. There was a huge crisis. You know what I'm trying to contest? There's this notion in intrinsic valuation that if you do intrinsic value, the number is supposed to be stable. It's not supposed to change. I'm going to contest that notion. I took 3M. I didn't change a single number about the company. But here's what I changed. What does a crisis do? It changes the price of risk. That's what equity risk means default spreads. I revalue the company with much higher equity risk means much higher default spreads. Pushes up my cost of capital. My value, which was $84, is now down to 61. You're saying, this is terrible. Your value shifted so much. But remember, you're not judged on how much the value shifts. It's what the value does relative to the price. And the price had dropped to 57. The stock had gone from being undervalued to fairly valued, even though the price had collapsed. So sometimes when you have a crisis, things will start looking cheap to you, right? Because the price is lower than it was 2 weeks ago. But the only way you can decide is to actually revalue the company with the higher equity risk, means make sure it is in fact cheaper, not just priced down because the price of risk has changed. So you know what you have to hope and pray does not happen after Friday? That there's no market crisis between now and May 13th. Do whatever you need to do. Prayers, sacrifice, pets, whatever you need to do, because if there is a crisis, you will have to revalue your company because all of the prices of risk will have changed. So we'll come back and continue doing these valuations.
Good. Thank you for the clarification on the cash Argentina. I was only emailing you about
Okay,
that.
do you get my point?
I get what you're saying.
It's not a crisis issue, it's a capital market access.
So by holding on to cash in Argentina with no capital market, now your cash is worth more to take advantage when no one else can come in.
So the